Hi everyone. Thanks for coming to this seminar about remaining in control in a digitalized world with your self-sovereign digital identity. I have the pleasure to talk about, within the next about 30 minutes, about the concept of self-sovereign identity, and we will also delve a little bit into the hacker ethics. And if you've just seen what happened out there in the track music compo, bringing a system to its limits and using it up to aspects it was never used to planned before. So you have just experienced that. So that's basically one of the key parts of hackerism. And yeah, we'll come into the end of the seminar. We'll come into the hacker ethics a little bit. So yeah, thanks for coming. Featured content is, if you have looked into the schedule a little bit, you see we talk about self-sovereign identity. I will let you know the concept of self-sovereign identity and we'll share a little bit insight what that means. We will also look into distributed ledger technology. Many of you know blockchain. DLT is the overarching term for this, and how it is viable for self-sovereign identity, for implementing self-sovereign identity into practice. We will take a look into classic ways of identifying people in networked systems such as PKI, and look how this compares to DLT. We'll go only briefly into that because it's quite a lengthy topic as such in general as well. And we will then look into, well, setting hacker ethics in context with a self-sovereign identity. Does that match? Has it any relation at all, or what's the take here? And obviously, in the end, I would like to discuss all this with you and get your feedback, because I want to continue my research in that area, and obviously an interested community helps me to understand this better and reflect the thoughts. So the goal is for us here today to make you aware of this overall concept and give you an introduction to the topic, and then obtain valuable other perspectives from all of us on these topics for further discussion. Okay, let's kick right in. So digital identity is one of the hardest problems in our networked world. What we have today is you're kind of in the center, but in fact you are not, because you have to liaise with all these different organizations, and you have to create in every single space another digital identity. So you have your friends and family, you have your administration, banking, telecom, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, you name it, everyone you go to, you have to have a digital identity, and you create it again and again and again. So in a network world, machines have identities and people don't, and that's the reason why we have to circumvent this by creating representations of digital identity over and over again. So every online service we use basically lures us into creating a new digital identity, and handling accounts and passwords is a constant struggle, a really hard to win battle, and if you want to name it identity spam, I think this is an appropriate term for this. So, but furthermore, services collect data about us to their own benefit and for undisclosed purposes. We have just publicly realized another incident in that area, so you're probably all familiar with what happened recently. And a digital identity of this kind, which you have with every single service of this kind, can be revoked, or its rules can be changed without you having any influence about this. And what's the summary of this? You are not in control, but you should be. So you should be de facto in the center of this, and all these services should come to you for offering their services, and you should be in control of what's happening. And self-sovereign identity is a concept that enables users to regain control on their data and on their online footprint. And the idea is basically that a self-sovereign identity is 100% owned and controlled by an individual. No one else can read it, use it, turn it off, take it away without the user's and owner's consent. And a self-sovereign identity is private, secure, and moves around with you. So actually, you have one identity that you bring to the places you want to use it with. And everything is centered around the user, so you, and exactly this is how it should be. You should be in control and in the center. And bring your own identity is then ultimately a possibility that can come true. So you go to the service and bring your own identity. So why is this related to blockchain, DLT, and so on? So why is it reasonable to discuss it in this context? So basically, distributed ledgers are around for a while. We have now all become aware of a concept called blockchain, mainly in the use of cryptocurrencies. But in general, we talk about a decentralized ledger, a decentralized database. Transactions are confirmed by a consensus mechanism. You've heard about proof of work, which is terribly expensive and energy consuming and so on, but there's alternatives. You have participants that are participants in the networks, either as nodes, as simple users, or miners who actually create the consensus in the network. All information resides on all of these nodes, so it's heavily decentralized and redundant. Integrity is ensured by chaining, so you chain transactions to one another, so you have complete control, and authenticity is ensured. Also, and authenticity is ensured by asymmetric encryption. And you are de facto technically enforcing the so-called CIA triad. You support confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And this is all basically built into DLT and blockchain technology. So this obviously works totally well for cryptocurrencies. Also supply chain tracking, supply chain management, tracking items, and all this kind of related stuff where you have basically some kind of a notary function. But it perfectly works for digital identity. And this is what I want to talk about a little bit more and give you an example how it can be put into practice. So, but in general, blockchains are not all alike. So blockchains differ in their concept and approach, and not necessarily every single blockchain technology is the right one for digital identity. So let's start with this graph here, this matrix. We have to differentiate who has access to a blockchain and who can actually validate transactions in a blockchain. So if you take a look, so who has access is differentiated in private and public, and who can validate is differentiated in permissionless and permissioned. So let's start with the obvious one that everyone knows. Anyone can read and validate. Is public permissionless. This is the Bitcoin use case. Everyone who today wants to go for Bitcoin mining can do so if it's reasonable and makes sense in your geographical area, depending on the energy costs and so on. Is a different question, but basically if you want to do this today, we can do it. No one is hindering us, and no one is hindering us to read it all. So we can basically try to validate transactions, and we can read the whole chain. The next one, access is private, so limited to only a defined set of people, audiences, organizations who can actually read the ledger, but anyone can basically, without permission, validate transactions on it. This doesn't sound right, really. So, because why should people mine or transaction put energy into something that they cannot benefit from on their own? They cannot read it. So this is a use case we can neglect and should not to spend too much time on. Then the other extreme, private permissionless kind of network is only authorized institutions or people can read and validate. So this is kind of a closed shop, like a consortium chain, which is locked up, so anyone who's in can benefit from it, can write to it, and can read it. So, not so charming because you lose the openness and the decentralization of the whole network over the world. And then, last but not least, we have public permissioned ledgers, meaning anyone can basically access the network and read from it, but only authorized institutions can validate transactions on it. And we have one example, which I will show a little bit later also, because this helps us to have at least control in a rather uncontrollable setting, which we would have in totally public permissionless networks such as Bitcoin. No one can execute governance over it, which hinders broad acceptance. You probably know about this. And this would allow us at least to do something with it more in controlled fashion. So looking at the pros and cons, obviously such a network like Bitcoin is totally robust, not been hacked. Everything that has been hacked was just the wallets. It was never the Bitcoin network itself. Expensive attacks are only possible in the Bitcoin world, so in the proof of work kind of world. Attacking the network is extremely expensive and will cost you a lot of resources. And you obviously also have complete transparency in the network, and you see that you can read all the transactions and can look into it. However, in such a construct, changes to introduce into the network setup as such is kind of inert. So it's really tough to implement these kind of changes because you have to convince the whole community to absorb the new technology, the new release, the new patch, whatever you want to introduce. And obviously, you have slow consensus mechanisms. You have block times in Bitcoin with 10 minutes, and the block size is kind of limited. And obviously, writing a block is very energy intense. So the other one, no reasonable application scenario, so I don't want to talk about it anymore. And then the closed shop scenario, you have access control. We can dispute about that if we need and want that, but this is at least what there is, and I think it's a pro because you have control over who is actually doing something with it. You have fast consensus mechanisms because you don't need to entertain this distributed consensus because everyone on the network you basically should be able to trust, otherwise you would not need a blockchain technology. Rollback is possible, even though this should only be a really rare instance to roll back actually a part of the chain. And this is kind of the pros on this solution. However, as in every closed shop, misuse is possible. It's like a centralized network as such. But in the end, you could also employ a distributed database without any blockchain technology. So that would be probably the cheaper and more efficient alternative. So with this public permissioned networks, I see a lot of advantages. And this is, it's also totally robust. You have also access control. You have full transparency because everyone can read from it. You have fast consensus possibilities. You can do a rollback if needed, should never be. And you have also a kind of potential to misuse the network. However, this is distributed governance executed on these kind of networks, so there should not be an easy misuse possible. So, coming on to PKI versus distributed ledger technology, I have a lengthy scheme of comparing these things, like organization, governance, technology, and so on. You can read it. We will iterate through a little bit, not go into every detail, but just the more prominent things I would like to point out. This is the explanation what it all means, but we will talk about it when we go through. So basically, if we take a look at a classical PKI, public key infrastructure setting, we have basically also kind of centralistic organization. So you have mostly one company operating the whole lot. The operating organization is executing governance over the construct. You have technology with hierarchical service, something that you don't have in a distributed world. So you have clear hierarchies, single point of failure. You need to trust in the central entity. Efficiency is totally high because you don't have this distributed consensus and these overhead among this. But you have some attack vectors. So if the root CA, certificate authority, is compromised, like happened in a more prominent case a couple of years back, then all the certificates are useless and everything has to be rolled out again. Regulation, meaning legal framework, is available. So you have the IDAS regulation, which basically promotes interchangeability of digital identities based on PKI throughout the European economic area. And this is totally working out. However, no one's doing it actually. Transparency is limited as the supervision is rarely possible, so because it's kind of also a closed shop. It maturity level is extremely high because you can use it today. Many organizations do. Large-scale organizations have PKIs rolled out, and it works well. And hence, as it requires a kind of organizational backing of it, only large organizations entertain PKI organizations, and obviously this kind of limits the overall usage. Perspectives in the long term is positive. In a closed context, it obviously makes sense to use it. interoperability is possible also for in the light of this IDAS regulation. There is an exchange framework where you can interconnect PKIs. However, this is not widely done so far. Scalability can be achieved with kind of significant effort, and integration effort, if you want to tie all your systems to PKI, is really cumbersome, especially when you design the systems without having that in mind. If you want to retrofit it, in the end, it is, well, kind of intense work. And target user group, I don't know how many of you have day-to-day working experience with PKI. In large organizations, you usually can have it, but not necessarily have it, but it's there. So I don't want to go into the full details with that. I just want to focus on the public permission piece to give you an example how this relates to the classical PKI world. If you look into a DLT, ledger-based system. So looking in the organization section, in a public permissioned world, you have a decentralized organization. Selected operators run the system. You have governance by a kind of a consortium, which acts on changes, on change requests, and well, actually executes control over the whole system. You have to trust in the consortium, which well, requires you to at least trust the overall framework. You don't need to trust a single entity, single organization, because it's a consortium of organizations, and they actually supervise also one another, so not everyone will completely act against the agreed trust framework. So in efficiency, it's high because you can have alternative consensus in such a kind of narrowed down setup, and you don't need the proof of work that is kind of expensive. Attack vectors is getting compromised, so if someone interferes with the governance framework of the system, okay, it can happen, but obviously you execute also control and security mechanisms in the system. Regulation, basically non-existent today. Transparency is good because you can perform transaction logging. However, maturity is in trial stage, so it's tested currently. It could be executed. We have prototypical applications, but no one is actually using it today. There is technologies there, you can do it, but if you want to do it, you have to, well, go to great lengths to implement it. However, I feel we have a clear yes on the long-term perspective for such a framework, and we can rely on interoperability being framed out because there's an overall framework that defined which allows different systems to interact with one another with a digital identity spec from W3C. Scalability is possible and intended. Integration effort is similar, but the target user group is everyone, and also Internet of Things components, kind of devices, can have digital identities in the framework as well. So this is just giving you a basic intro how this relates in the classic hierarchical world back to the new decentralized world with distributed ledgers. And yeah, this is obviously open for debate. If you have another view, we can take a look at it later again. So I would like to give you an example on such an implementation of self-sovereign identity and decentralized trust. This is the sovereign framework, which is available in a provisional state. You can use it. You can look at it. You have validator nodes which execute the writes. You have observer nodes which observe the whole process, and you have kind of all different types of devices connecting to the network and doing identity transactions. So this is completely global DLT-based identity network. It uses this decentralized identifiers, DIDs, which allow cross-operational usage. It is fast and consumes a little energy only because it has an alternative consensus mechanism called redundant Byzantine fault tolerance, RBFT. It's governed by a non-profit organization. So it's a foundation which actually tries to ensure diversity in the network operating organizations, because these stewards, which actually run this whole show, have to commit to the common statutes and operate then the validator nodes. It obviously is based on the DID spec, cross-operational with other networks, and it's open source software. So you can basically look into the code and draw your own conclusions for it, because it's part of the Hyperledger Indy framework, which is a common framework for blockchain applications. So, how does this now all relate to the hacker ethics? Good question. I came to this idea because I'm obviously interested in the whole history of computing and how hacker ethics evolved, and I wanted to understand, how does this fit to this new framework of self-sovereign identity? Is there a match or is there no match? Let's take a look what I found out or what my take on it is. So brief recap, what is hacker ethics? So hacker ethics are basically based on this book from Stephen Levy from 1984. And he first introduced the concept of hacker ethics in this book, Hackers, Heroes of the Computer Revolution. This was back in 1984. And he explored all different types of hackers. So what he calls first generation hackers, the hackers of MIT in the artificial intelligence lab. And then the second wave of hackers are the hardware hackers in Silicon Valley, which in fact founded the computing industry out of the Homebrew Computer Club and so on. And then later on, third wave hackers, which actually hacked games. They produced games at large scale in the golden ages of gaming, also 8-bit platforms and so on. This obviously reflects Levy's understanding of the hacker culture based on the interviews he did with hackers. So he was not considered a hacker as such, but he had a close insight because he performed dozens or even hundreds of interviews with hackers. And this is a really cool read. I highly recommend it. It's a perfect book. You can get a revised version from 2010. You can order it anywhere. And it's really cool read. It's also available as an audiobook. I highly recommend it. If you're into this, take it. However, then a guy you probably know, Mo Holland, one of the founders of the Chaos Computer Club, added to this hacker ethic in the 1980s because these guys thought that privacy of individuals need to be strengthened and freedom of information needs to be emphasized. So, for those of you who have not on the top of your head all the hacker ethics, I have put them here. So, first of all, these greenish ones link to Levy's understanding and the two reddish ones link to Chaos Computer Club addendum. So, actually the hacker ethics states that access to computers should be unlimited and total. So anything which might teach you something about the way the world works with computers should be possible, and you should always yield to the hands-on imperative. So if you can try it out, you should. Second postulate was that all information should be free. This was heavily debated, obviously, because of the upcoming discussion about property rights, intellectual property rights. And moving on, you will see a little bit of contradiction also in that here. Mistrust authority, promote decentralization. So you should foster decentralized systems wherever you can. Fourth one, hackers should be judged by their hacking. Usually this is the only clause that is there, but it was a little bit modified. Not bogus criteria such as degrees, age, race, or position. So just the hacking counts, just the skills count. You can create art and beauty on a computer. Obviously, we are on a celebration event of art and beauty on computers here, so we should enjoy it and be grateful for this hacker ethic in this postulate here, that we can enjoy this kind of great work. And then philosophical trait, computers can change your life for the better. I think most of us will buy into that right away. Then the add-ons by Chaos Computer Club emphasized more that you should, well, respect the personal privacy of each individual. So the seventh postulate was don't litter on other people's data. So you should, in German it's müllen nicht in anderer Leute Daten. So don't mess around or, well, litter in other people's data. And make public data available and protect private data. So everything that's considered public should be used and utilized. So private Daten nützen, other way around. Öffentliche Daten nützen, private Daten schützen. That's the eighth claim: make public data available, protect private data. So what I now try to do is look at every single one of those and see how it maps to the self-sovereign identity context and concept. So I've looked into two perspectives: self-sovereign identity from a technology point of view and the application view. So the technology can be completely different picture than the actually application usage of this concept. So this is all my take. I'm happy to discuss it, and this is what's coming up next also. Access to computers. In the SSI technology world, obviously this whole framework promotes accessibility and is accessible for anyone in the sense of a public utility, so buy-in. In the application, it's a little bit different because the SSI concept applied can help the user to protect their own digital realm. This obviously makes sense, however, this contradicts to the hacker ethic. All information should be free. The technology is open source and free to use. However, again, on the other side, users protect their own digital realm. So this would be adversary to this concept. Point 3, mistrust authority promote decentralization. So SSI technology is fully decentralized. We can discuss the governance part, but this is not a technology piece, but the technology is fully decentralized, so buy-in. And in the application, users are urged to decentralize their data. Nothing should be put on the ledger, so everyone should be completely in control where their data resides, and this can be totally decentralized, so buy-in as well. Then hackers should be judged by the hacking, not other criteria. So technology, from my point of view, is neatly hacked and heavily supports diversity, so buy-in here. And obviously, on the other side, anyone is also free to hack as he pleases. There's no differentiation based on the bogus criteria, so everything is fine. Then you can create art and beauty on a computer. This is a difficult one, because obviously this depends on the definition of what you consider art. We have seen here graphic computation in a music tracker, so I don't know what's possible with all that, so let's see what can happen here. But in the application, I don't know, maybe some ASCII art, I don't know. Let's see what comes. Computers can change your life for the better. Obviously, this is a clear buy-in for me because it promotes digital identity for all, also for those who today don't have identities. And this is a big majority of people in the world today. And digital identity can in fact help many. Many people who don't have an Ausweis, a Reisepass, whatever, proof of identity in the real world, they are subject to all kinds of weird stuff happening, like human people trafficking, like slavery, whatever. We don't see that on a daily basis in our Western world, but this happens, and this is also based on a lack of identity framework. So this would definitely make the life of these people better. Then the last two, don't litter on other people's data. The technology enables full control for all. So it completely supports this statement. And here, you see the same statement here. Users protect their own digital realm. This obviously is in line with this ethic component. And then the last but not least, make public data available, protect private data. This technology supports privacy and fosters sharing. So if you want to share your data, obviously it's not hindering you. It helps you even share data. And again, users can protect their own digital realm, which links to protection of private data. So this is obviously completely my take. I've looked into it. I come to the conclusion that this is makes sense. However, I'm happy to discuss this with you and see your view and understand your perspective on that. Any comments, feedback, and I'm happy for an interesting discussion with this because I want to continue working on this and would like to share it also with broader audiences. This has not been shown anywhere else before, so I'm happy to hear your thoughts and yeah, what do you think? Thanks for listening. Anyone?
Regarding all data should be free as one of the hacker ethics, that basically clashes with a lot of laws, especially in the US. I would like to know if the hacker ethics, first of all, that's an American book, if I'm not mistaken.
It is, yes.
And second of all, how does the industry recognizes these sort of ethics?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there has been a lot of debate and changes in the perception of this. Let me start with an explanation on the term hacker. Hacker was, in nowadays definition, most people think of hackers as trespassers accessing systems for malicious intent. But this notion was totally different in the early days. Someone who hacked was someone who was proficient with systems, who could do magic with the systems, as we see here. So this is the original definition. And these guys, originating in this in the MIT AI lab, for example, they basically had no limits of using data, information, code, equipment whatsoever. They even considered lockpicking totally normal. So MIT students had basically these hacker guys of the Tech Model Railroad Club, where this all originated from, had remade master keys of all the doors. So they could access basically any professor's office and grab equipment, whatever they needed. And there was a huge debate also in that time if this should be supported or not. And obviously, one of the first guys who brought this problem with intellectual property rights up was Bill Gates, because he complained that his version of Ultra Basic was copied among the hacker community because no one thought about that it could be a problem to copy this stuff. So obviously today we have complete different understanding of intellectual property rights and strong enforcement of this. However, as we see in community discussions and what actually happens in the world, that more people publish their work as open source. You can look at the code. Open source does not necessarily mean that it's free for usage, but it's open source. Some completely open up their code for everyone to use. So we kind of see two cultures clashing here. So we have, on the one hand, intellectual property rights strongly being promoted by the industries because they want to earn money with that. Okay, perfectly reasonable. But on the other hand, people acting in the old ways of the hacker spirit, making their work open source and promoting further usage of it, sharing economy. All this ties totally in together. So this is something that is this is old, right? This was written in '84. It was analyzed 5 years earlier, or the 5 years interview time. However, this hacker ethic has made it in today's world, but in the Wau Holland Stiftung, there's also an idea of a hacker ethic 2.0, which strongly emphasizes on protection of personal data, personal rights, and so on. So there's constant evolution of that. However, yeah, I see your point. This is completely not in line with many laws today, right?
Thank you for your comparison, I would say. For me, one of the largest questions is how practical is this nowadays? Because you have talked a lot about the technology, but where is it right now? So how far are we? I didn't get it, or probably you told us, but I didn't get it. And the second is, I think it's a very, to make this happen, actually, it has to be very easy to have this in a public space somehow, and you need to have systems which adapt such technologies. So my question is, what do you think, how can we actually make this happen to an audience which is nowadays really like, yeah, very unclear what's actually happening, because from my point of perspective right now we are talking about an age of a new Kant Aufklärung. We are in some kind of Kant 2.0, I would say. We have to promote to people what it actually how actually technology works nowadays.
True.
Because they don't really see the point how all this is working. And I wonder how a solution with, you want to promote a technology to solve a technological problem. So that's always a discussion which is going, So I'm asking you, what can we do about that?
I mean, the whole story is everyone's talking about digitalization today, so we are moving into yet another age of a digital world. So basically, we are solving problems that we didn't have before now with technology because of technology. Okay, tools to make tools, but I see that point. So let me start with the first question. Where's technology today? This is one example of technology that is out there. It's called provisional, so it's in a kind of testing state currently. You can actually use it, but there's more. There's other platforms such as Uport, which is based on Ethereum. They have an identity framework. Another one that I have looked into is Blockstack. It's more like a PKI-ish DNS kind of framework, which is piggybacked onto existing blockchains or cryptocurrencies. So this is examples. I think this is a strong example which is about to gain more momentum. So I see a good chance that this will be something that we will see more of, and you can actually use it. However, how do we bring it into the field? I think no one, as a standard user, regular person, would like to say now, oh, cool, I want to get an idea on this. This is not working. I think we need to gain clear use cases and actually large-scale organizations having a need to solve an identity-related problem. So this will not work without pilots from big organizations having to deal with identities digitally. So if we see someone starting, and this is like the chicken and egg problem, who wants to kick it off? I don't know if we will see it kicking off first here in Germany, but in the international world it's kind of renowned. So someone will move into the direction. And there has been a great paper of the World Economic Forum published recently, which has depicted an excellent use case. So travelers, people traveling frequently, and traveling increases all over the world. We all know that. So if you would have such a digital identity, and you would be willing to pre-share certain information before you go on a trip, and you can be actually identified as a traveler at the security gate, and it is totally clear that you is you and you have shared the information, they can in fact lower the risk profile that you can clear the security gate basically without doing anything. And this is a huge driver for digital identity. And this only works if you can operate it across geographical and jurisdictional boundaries. So if everyone would be using this kind of identity framework, you could have a huge benefit for travelers and in the national security world and whatever. So this
change your behavior.
yeah, true. Yeah, I see the point. Yeah, I think this is cool. I really recommend it. It's not in the references here, but it's a cool paper. It's called The Known Traveler. It's from the World Economic Forum, and they exactly dive into this kind of technology-driven identity settings. And I think we are in the advent of getting something like that, but someone has to kick it off. And I'm looking for anyone who wants to support me in these efforts. I'm eager to make it work because I think it's a really good thing.
Somehow connected to Sovereign?
Well, my company is. So I'm not on behalf of my company here today. So we're working with these guys. I know they have an open forum. You can look into it. Also, Blockstack, Uport, all have. So there's another one.
Thank you. I didn't get who gets to choose validator nodes, and who is a validator and who isn't. And could you give one real life example?
Yeah. The organization executing governance over this is the Sovereign Foundation. So it's a non-profit foundation, and if you want to become a member, you have to look at that trust framework. It's a document, I don't know how many pages, and commit that you will support this trust framework and not break any of the joint rules. And you want to support the concept of self-sovereign identity. So you have to comply. You can do it as a person, as an organization, whatever. You have to comply to the rules, and then you have to set up a node, technically. So you have to support it also. You have to be available when software changes come up and so on. So you have to be responsible, take over ownership of operating such a node. So this technical governance board decides who gets onboarded to the network. And obviously, everyone has to operate the same software basis, and everyone has to commit to the statutes of the foundation. The charming thing is it's a non-profit organization, so they have per se no own interest. The software was in fact developed by a private company, and they collected investor money, produced the basic framework, and made it open source. So they transformed it into the foundation, because they were of the opinion that they as a company can never convincingly promote such a concept. So they said, we make it open source, we make it non-profit, so we let the organization govern itself, and they do additional work, service, software, whatever, that ties into that all. So that's a different story. So anyone who wants to participate today has to sign up for the statutes, set up the technology, and then can operate it. And then you obviously also have a role in the framework and can contribute to it and discuss with the technical governance board and so on. It's neat. I like it.
So another question is, it basically boils down to what exactly is an identity. So because in the simplest case, an identity is one person, but it could also be, it's like a group, let's say a demo group, or it could be that it's the same person but different roles, like this is my business identity and this is my private or demo scene or whatever identity. So how far is it intended to go? Is it possible to link between the two, or is it just independent? Because the more flexible it gets, you can maybe also get more control, but also makes it more difficult, more prone that things don't work that well. So what are the current plans or tendencies?
Good question. Actually, it's basically for any type of construct which can hold an identity. So you would also be able not to issue personal identities. You could also register for revision an identity, or for more formalized organization, you could register an organizational identity. Obviously, someone would be the custodian of that identity and would hold it and would govern it. But you as a person could, with these organizational IDs, form connections. And the charming thing about that is that you don't have just one identifier in that network, but many. You have one of your master identity, and for every single connection you want to form, to create, you can in fact have a sub-identity, so that it's totally intransparent who is holding the master identity. So you could have a network of your own sub-identities to prevent correlation, what's happening today, like Google, Facebook, what all these guys are doing. They correlate your various identities and are able to do exact profiling on what you do online and your behavior and your purchasing decisions and so on. That's valuable to them. But with this, this DID framework, you could be handing out separate identity for every single communication you do, but you would know, obviously because you have them all together, that these are yours, and no one else would be able to correlate them except you. Yeah, so I hope this answers the question. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your contribution. Glad that you liked it, and yeah. I will report frequently on this, so I will let you know what happens. Thanks.
Where?
Here.